Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Who is your client? That's what Shai has asked me to focus on. And when I started to think about this deceptively simple question, I realized that it is one that is really remarkably difficult to answer, particularly for organizations that pursue more than a single bottom line. So my presentation this evening is really in the spirit of prompting some reflection rather than giving you answers. Nationally and globally, we're at the crossroads, a crossroads that really forces us to think about how we should be designing business for the 21st century. And those of you who are here tonight, many of you who will be the business leaders of the future, have a huge responsibility in this regard. Business is tough enough when it's only about one bottom line: making money. So why overcomplicate matters and not just stick to one bottom line, one client, and just maximize shareholder value? One could argue that the modern corporation, as we know it today, has thrived precisely on that mantra. And in so doing, there's little doubt that it has really empowered tremendous creative genius and bestowed great social benefits. But we are also very much aware that many of the ills of modern life, such as non-sustainable levels of personal and institutional debt, toxic air and water, workplace injury, loss of livelihoods and communities, political bribery, etc., can be traced to corporate lack of responsibility to one or more of these stakeholders. And now that's not intentional. Nobody in their right mind wants to cause poverty or pollution or disease or injury or unemployment, etc., or foster corruption. Rather, they want to make profits. But in that pursuit, they may find that antisocial behavior pays. So to achieve profits in the short term, corporations have exacted a social and environmental price. And that price is high, and it's been rising. The reality is that if we are to thrive as a people and a planet, the model has to be radically rethought. And in so doing, we need to take a number of clients or customers into account. And that doesn't depend on where in the supply chain you are, but also on considering seriously a much wider group of stakeholders as our clients, including the communities and the fragile environmental ecosystems where we have a footprint. To get a sense of what I'm talking about, I want to look at a much celebrated model of fair trade. Who is the customer or the client in fair trade? It's a model that purports to adhere to a social, an environmental, and a financial bottom line. So I'm sure that those of us here would say that the reason that we buy fair trade products is because our most important target there, our most important client, if you will, in that chain, is the farmer to whom we are willing to pay a premium for an organically produced high-quality product: coffee, tea, chocolate, whatever. After all, that is what we buy into when we show our preference for commodity-labeled fair trade. However, for the certifier who verifies that the product can bear the fair trade label, the client is not really that farmer at all. Instead, it is the product's distributor who needs to know that environmental and social bottom lines have been met so he can safely say this is fair trade and organically produced. And then again, for the retailer that sells the product, the Starbucks, the Costa Coffees, the Marks and Spencers of the world, the client is you and me, who buy the coffee at a premium price, which in turn keeps the company's shareholders happy, which to them are the ultimate clients. In fact, the interesting thing about the fair trade model is how little the farmer actually has to do with anything but growing the commodity. By signing up for the privilege of selling fair trade under that fair trade label, and despite the extra demands of achieving certification, the farmer has to forego a portion of the extra earnings for a community project to be decided by the leaders of that cooperative. It might be a school, it might be a playground, it might be, you know, a road, whatever. These are all important community assets. But when I've talked to farmers around the world about this, many of them say they would rather keep all of their earnings for them to decide how it will be, how they will use it. So it seems to me that perhaps there's also a governance bottom line here that needs to be looked at. Now, my purpose in bringing this up is not to criticize fair trade by any means. It's simply to point out how, particularly in the realm of business that has more than one bottom line, who your client is depends not just on where in the supply chain you are and who pays you for your deliverables. It's also about continuously accounting to your Uber client, if you would, or clients, the communities and the environment in which your business is operating. And for companies that have traditionally focused only on a financial bottom line, this would mean radically rethinking their operations. So it's little wonder that businesses are reluctant to engage in the broader structural changes required to be truly sustainable businesses. But really, fortunately, and this is what really gets me excited, there are a number of companies, and this is growing, that are harbingers of what business in the 21st century is going to look like. And I'm going to mention just 2 examples, but there are lots of others around the world, as I'm sure you already know. And then I'm going to close by challenging you with where this is all going and cite an example of how the future of entrepreneurship, or what they call now social entrepreneurship, and I have to confess right here that I hate the term, but I'll go into that later, how that's playing out in the world of microfinance. So as with any entrepreneur who sees an opportunity where the rest of us mere mortals only see huge looming problems, Jeff Mendelsohn took on the paper industry, which is one of the most polluting and resource-intensive industries in the world. It's responsible for over 1/3 of worldwide timber harvest and over 40% of all landfill waste in the United States alone. Jeff wanted to change that behavior by proving that there's money to be made by changing the model and creating a sustainable paper industry, what some skeptics initially called pulp fiction. He founded New Leaf Paper in 1998. According to the Environmental Paper Network, choices about paper and its use and selection are the most significant decisions that a company can make. Printing double-sided, or better yet, not printing at all, can hugely reduce your environmental footprint. But until the world decides to go 100% digital, paper is a necessity. When it comes to creating paper with the least impact on the environment, New Leaf is really leading the pack. Sorry about the pun. New Leaf has embedded its social and environmental values into every product line and every business relationship. Its strategy is solving this classic chicken and egg question in the paper industry, where both the supply side and the demand side are really unable to change their behavior. Leveraging the strength and clarity of the company's mission, New Leaf developed a market for truly environmentally responsible paper and has served this market through leading product innovation. So since its founding in 1998, its sales have grown to almost 100 million annually. New Leaf items are manufactured 100% with renewable energy. This is the first company in the United States to ever do this. And paper made with wind power and biogas energy obviously helps reduce customers' carbon emissions footprint in a very measurable way. Now, the company develops most white paper. It looks like any other paper, but it's not made from wood. It's made from a whole different kind of ingredients. There's a hierarchy of preferred ingredients that I'm not going to go into. But in sum, New Leaf Paper sets out to model the behavior it hopes to see in its competition and in the paper industry in general. So who is New Leaf's client? Who is its customer? There are multiple, given its multiple bottom lines. The company that buys the paper, the mill that New Leaf is having to convince to radically change the raw materials and the way that they produce the paper, the wider society that consumes the paper, the investors who really believe in New Leaf's mission but also want a return. But ultimately, the real client is the forest and the ecosystem and the environment. So you can see how complicated this who is your customer gets. Let's go to India for our second example briefly. Dr. Devi Prasad Shetty is meeting an unmet need of a very different sort through an innovative business model in health. Heart disease is one of the most common illnesses in India. Approximately 2.4 million people need heart surgery every year in the country. But due to a lack of affordable treatment, only 60,000 surgeries are performed. The prevalence of the disease has significant implications, as you can imagine, for the workforce. It's estimated that 28% of the 5 million Indians who die from cardiovascular disease every year are under 65. The average age for heart disease in the West is 65. In India, it's 45. For some reason, there seems to be a genetic predisposition in the population for cardiovascular disease. Congenital heart disease is a particular concern. Around 224,000 newborns in India are affected every year, and the rural population is particularly susceptible due to its poverty and et cetera. So given that less than 14% of the population is supported by health insurance, treatment is only an option for the rich or those able to borrow to pay the bill. Now, Devi Shetty is one of India's most celebrated heart surgeons, but his contribution to medicine is not his surgical skill. Rather, it's his determination to make this huge industry more effective by applying Henry Ford's management principles or McDonald's management principles. He believes that a combination of economies of scale and specialization can radically reduce the cost of heart surgery. His flagship hospital, which is the Narayana Hinduyalaya Hospital, has 1,000 beds against an average of 160 beds in most cardiovascular hospitals in the United States. And Shetty and his team of 40-odd cardiologists perform about 600 operations a week. Patient numbers allow surgeons to acquire world-class expertise in particular operations, and their generous backup facilities let them focus on the specialty rather than having to do administrative paperwork. The hospital charges an average of, get this, $2,000 for open heart surgery, compared with $20,000 to $100,000 in America. But its success rates are as good as as the best in America. So Dr. Shetty has also established video and internet to reduce the environmental footprint and to actually have links with hospitals throughout India, Africa, and Malaysia, so that his surgeons can actually give expert advice to less experienced colleagues. He also has clinics on wheels that do outreach to the rural centers, et cetera. He's created a health insurance scheme working with various local self-help groups, and he covers 2.5 million people for a premium of about 11 cents a month each. About a third of the hospital's patients are now enrolled in the scheme, and a sliding scale of fees for operations so that richer customers subsidize the poorer ones. It's very similar to what we know as the Aravind Eye Care Hospital model in Chennai or Madurai, India as well, that uses a very similar model. The entire enterprise is surprisingly profitable for considering the number of poor people it's treating for free. The hospital group reports 7.7% profit after taxes, compared with an average of 6.9% in American private hospitals. So who is Dr. Shetty's client? Ultimately, it's the poor. As with Jeff Mendelson, Shetty's genius is in completely rethinking the traditional business model. And that's really what these entrepreneurs are doing. They're not innovating in terms of products. They're innovating much more in terms of business models. And they're responding to a client in a way that is socially and environmentally acceptable. There are lots of other examples that I can provide of for-profit social ventures that are pioneering new approaches to address multiple bottom lines. None of the examples that I provide are publicly listed companies. Seventh Generation did go public several years ago. It's a pioneering company in the United States that manufactures environmentally sustainable household products. But it reverted back to being a privately held status. And I won't get into the details, but Jeff Mendelson often says that it was extremely expensive to go public. And not only that, it actually ended up lowering their shareholder value, and they had to pay dearly for actually going public as well. Going public or getting bought out by a public company are very tricky when you are a mission-oriented entrepreneurial venture. The late Anita Roddick, who, as you know, was the founder of The Body Shop, I met with her about a year before she died, and she told me that selling out to L'Oreal was the worst business mistake she had ever made, which I found interesting. Now, another social entrepreneurial venture, if any of you have traveled to the US, and I don't even know if they have it in London, is a big company called Whole Foods, which was launched by entrepreneur John Mackey in 1978. It was initially a natural foods market called Safeway, served 3,000, a very small group of clients. He opened it up with his girlfriend with initial $45,000 in capital. Today, Whole Foods is a publicly traded company with over $12 billion in sales. On a percentage basis, Whole Food Market is the most profitable public food retailing business in the US, with the highest net profit percentage, sales growth, and sales per square foot. However, I have to say, in the US, Whole Foods has a new name. Its prices are so exorbitant that only the high, upper middle class and wealthy can afford to shop there. And even they have dubbed the company with the name Whole Paycheck. So has Whole Foods sacrificed something along the way? Question. So my question to you is as follows. If we're to radically transform markets so that they're responsive to people, planet, and politics, these companies need to access significant sources of capital to scale. No amount of private investor funds is going to do the job that the capital markets can actually do. But to do that, these entrepreneurial ventures at this point need to go public. And when that does happen, how do you adhere to those multiple clients and not get lost in the tyranny of quarterly reports and maximizing shareholder value? I don't know if I have time. Do I have any time to end with 4 minutes? Yeah. 4 minutes? I want to end with excerpts of a fascinating debate that will highlight the who is your client quandary as currently being played out in the field of microfinance. I attended the Clinton Global Initiative last month and was in the room for this debate between Mohammed Yunus, who, as you all know, is the founder of the Grameen Bank, who believes very firmly that when microfinance institutions go public, they lose their client focus, and which for him is the poor woman to whom Grameen makes the loan. Now, Vikram Akula, whom I know very well as well, founded SKS Microfinance in India and is a self-acclaimed follower of Mohammed Yunus in the Grameen model. He launched the IPO for SMS to enable it to grow very quickly through the capital markets, which he says was the one way he could respond to the growing number of women and their demand for microcredit. And the third person in the debate, but I'm not going to show you, but she was sort of in the middle, is Mary Ellen Iskandarian, who was the head of Women's World Banking, who does share some insights, and you can look at this at your leisure later on. She shares some insights as to what really does happen to that target group of clients when a organization that is started as an NGO in microfinance decides to become a regulated bank and where the client gets lost there. So I'm just quickly going to say a few minutes of this, and then I hope to have provoked you with some thinking. What drives me is, where are we going to get the money without losing the mission? So that's my challenge at this point. Let's see. This one? Okay, great. I promise I'm not going to show you the whole thing. Let me just...
National Public Radio?
No. I don't want to go there.
Jackson really could make an important difference.
Okay, hang on.
So
You wouldn't
just to
believe
give
I
you the
spent so much
context
of my
SKS
Sunday trying to
from
get
the
these
outset.
right.
In order to
Wait.
attract credit.
No, I've got it.
But it became very...
Okay.
As someone who devoted his career and his training to helping poor people, if you were trying to become a big fancy bank CEO, you made a terrible series of career choices. But how do we trust that 10 years from now, 40 years from now, SKS will continue to have serving the poor as central to its mission. The phrase in the literature is mission drift. And how is it not inevitable that the pull for profits will outlast you and will eventually shift away from caring whether women are the main recipients or positive uses are made of the loans?
So just to give you the context of SKS, from the outset, from 2005 when we converted to a for-profit till today, the social ownership of our company has been negligible. My holding as a stakeholder in this is quite negligible. We have been owned by for-profit, highly commercially oriented investors. But absolutely, we see at SKS Microfinance no conflict between the social mission that is our actual mission of helping to eradicate poverty and the commercial approach. Now let me explain why this makes sense. In a typical financial services company, the idea is you push up loan sizes, for example, because that increases your profits. You raise interest rates to as high as you can because that increases your profits. At SKS Microfinance, to give you an example, our loan officers are not incentivized on loan size. Whether our loan officer gives a $40 loan to a woman, and we work 100% exclusively with women, or a $400 loan to a woman, he gets compensated in exactly the same way. Now we do that because we want him to give the right loan amount for the right individual and not to push out something that may increase profits but actually may not be good for her. Likewise, when it comes to interest, we could easily increase our interest rates to a much higher amount and probably not lose a single customer and extract from them because in many cases we're in a monopoly situation. Yet we don't do so. We don't push out large loan sizes and we don't charge what the market can bear in terms of interest. And we do that because it's socially, in terms of our mission, the right thing to do. Having said that, let me give you the business logic. The business logic is you create greater shareholder value not by extracting from someone when she takes a $40 loan, but rather by, as she moves up the economic ladder and moves to a $400 loan, moves to taking 3, 4 different insurance products, 5, 6 different credit products from you, that's when you create greater shareholder value. So the business logic actually lands you in exactly the same place that the social logic does. Now let me give you the testament to why we think that's absolutely true. Look at SKS over its history. We've reduced our interest rates from 36% to 30 to 28 to 27, and in 2/3 of our regions we're at 24%. In the same period of time, and I want to get this number right because we're a listed company, in the same period of time we've increased our ROEs from 5 to 12 to 18 to last fiscal 22%. You see the interest rates coming down, you see the loan sizes in the first year borrower staying the same, and you see the ROEs going up off the roof. You can bring these two together elegantly. It is not a zero-sum situation.
Okay, now we will hear Professor
Now,
Yunus, who looks very angry.
You're pursuing doesn't really determine whether you're doing microfinance or not. What we're really focused on, frankly, is that second part of access to financial services to the poor. You have to take that step from the NGO to the regulated institution, and that means a capital injection, and the story moves on from there.
Can I?
Yeah, Eunice.
Just a few clarification in this discussion. You implied that I'm somehow opposed to profit. I'm not. Grameen Bank is a for-profit organization. We want to make profit. So we are not NGO, we are a bank. But ownership is the question. The Grameen Bank is owned by the borrowers. So we make profit, profit goes back to them. So we protect that part. So what we are opposed to when you say profit or commercialization, it's a money of the poor going out to somebody else. And you may say, well, what's wrong with taking a small amount of profit? Then I'll say, is it small? Who defines that small? How do you have any rule that will keep it restricted to this percentage? You're not. It's an open thing. So anybody who makes profit can do that. So today you may say, well, we are making only a small profit, but tomorrow, because of the system that you have, you'll like to maximize your profit. It's a wrong direction. That's all I'm saying. That Grameen Bank is a for-profit organization. It is a bank. It's a regulated bank. It has its own law. It is regulated by the central bank. So everything is there. So we are not opposed to making profit, only who makes the profit out of the poor people and how much. That is the issue. If somebody said, oh, we are a restricted profit area, we take only 1% profit or 2% profit, I said, go right ahead, no problem. But the moment you say profit, sky's the limit. You saw what happened, this financial crisis and all that, because the sky's the limit. So that is the problem for us. And you mentioned this other services. Grameen Bank, where does the money come from?
As you can see, and I really urge you to look at this whole film. It's a hot topic. Interestingly enough, if you look at the Financial Times yesterday, there was an article on SKS microfinance. As Yunus says, and I can tell you I can see both sides of this. I firmly believe in financial markets and the capital markets, but Professor Yunus has been around for a long time. And Vikram has been around for just a few years. And one of the issues that the Financial Times was reporting was that women are having a very hard time paying back their loans and the amount of very short time required to turn those loans around. And the government of India in Andhra Pradesh has now passed a law, or required, that they take longer or be given more time to pay back the loans. And SKS is protesting vigorously that they need the sharp turnaround. So as you can see, the jury's still out on who is the client here. Is it your shareholders or is it the poor women? Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela.
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking me to take an historical look backwards and an historical look to where we were. I actually think that if you look historically, companies, in fact, were entrusted with social responsibility. That was part of their charter. And it's only very recently, I think, in the past, certainly in the past 50 years, that we've seen this rampant growth of sort of, I'd say, more Friedman-like philosophy of, you know, maximizing shareholder value above all, which people are beginning to question now. I think that the current focus on corporate social responsibility, I have many doubts. I really do believe in bringing the two things together the way that corporations were meant to be. And I see that happening, and in fact being mainstreamed. I mean, I'm looking at what some companies are doing, a la Marks and Spencer, and you know, they're really looking at their supply chain very seriously. They're desperately trying to restructure those supply chains. So I'm a great believer, in fact, in that the change is going to happen on the part of business. I am less a believer that the charitable charitable sector is going to do anything but be more palliative in nature, as it's always been so. I think it exercises a very important distributive role in society, but I don't believe it's going to change things the way the business sector can. So I'm a great believer in business. I'm going to modify your question a little bit, and I just want to share with you something that does worry me. As you know, I'm at Oxford, and I have a lot of, and at Columbia Business School, and many of the business school students often come knocking on my doors saying, I really want to get involved in this whole area, but I'm saddled with a debt that I have to pay back. And this means that I actually have to go into mainstream business at this point to be able to pay that back. I wish there were some way, and what really worries me is the change has to come from you all. We're too old, you know, I mean, in other words, we can change, but it's going to be up to you all to be able to make that change. So how do we create the conditions whereby young people who really want to passionately pursue these new types of models, and as you said, startups are, you know, it's tough. So the last thing you want to do is be saddled with, in the case of Oxford, a £55,000 debt or £45,000 debt that you have to pay back, and doesn't allow you to go into to those spaces to test these things out, and not necessarily be an entrepreneur, but perhaps be an intrapreneur, helping people set those companies up. That's what MBAs are really great at. So that's a stakeholder or a client that I am passionate about, and wish there were a way that we could forgive all these loans. I guess the first thing I would say is there's this misconception that when you get, that's why I don't like the term social enterprise, because what I'd love to see is the day where all enterprise is social enterprise, where there is no way that you can separate or bifurcate how you make your money and how you do the right thing. Because as long as we keep saying, well, this is where I'm going to maximize my money, and this is where I'm going to do my philanthropy, we are really going to be screwed. So hopefully, you guys will be able to find a different way of combining those two things.